Can't you just raise it up?
So good afternoon, everybody. I have 4:30, so I am going to get started. 1 minute slow up there. How's everybody doing at 4:30? Last session of the day. Glad you can come. I'm Dr. Bea. You can call me Patty. I'm going to have the other folks introduce themselves. I work at Albany Law School. I'm the Director of Online Learning and Instructional Technology there. I wear many hats. My title is a little deceiving, but I was a professor for 10 years, so I've been in the field teaching for a while, and I just restarted back at Albany Law School about 3 years ago. I was there for 6 years in 2001 to 2006, so I've been to Cali a long time ago, just coming back to Cali now. I feel like it's a whirlwind. I work with a lot with assessment at Albany Law School. I work a lot with, obviously, working on LLM certificate programs, and we have some JD courses that are online as well. I also work on our instructional technology component in addition to the assessment element, and really we're focusing on pedagogy. Who's next on our list? Tia.
Okay. My name is Latia Ward. I go by Tia for short. I am a research services librarian and diversity fellow at Cornell University Law Library. So my job encompasses research, teaching, and reference. And I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, folks. I'm Meg Butler. I'm the Associate Director for Public Services at Georgia State University College of Law Library, and I have been a librarian for about 12 years and have been teaching most of that time in some capacity, and I'm looking forward to talking to you guys today about the ABA standards.
So backwards design, just show of hands, how many people have heard of that language before, backwards design? So I'm just going to do a brief overview. Some of you have the knowledge already. Some of you might just need a refresher. And so backwards design is essentially starting with the ends in mind, and the ends first, and thinking really about what you want folks to accomplish in your classroom. This is both for online, face-to-face, hybrid, doesn't matter the environment. It's thinking about the objectives first. And so what we're actually doing is breaking it down in about 3 steps, just to make it really easy for everybody to think about it in 3 steps. The first is thinking about what you want your students to understand. The second is determining what you want them to learn, thinking about what you want them to accomplish. So the first one, thinking more about objectives, outcomes, and I use Bloom's taxonomy. There's other methodologies you can use to develop those objectives, but I focus on Bloom's taxonomy. That second part is thinking really about how they're going to actually obtain that thing, the information. And so I always go back really from earlier today, from our guest speaker this morning, who had that one slide. I don't know if you remember, there was one slide that had all of those different multimodal techniques that you can use to really engage your students. So I want you to kind of reflect back to that. There was tons of things you can do, discussion boards, conversations, exams, think about all the different ways you can engage, video, audio. And then last is really thinking about the classroom experiences and designing it in a way to affect and grab the assessments that you need. So that's the basic overview. And so when I'm thinking about this, I kind of frame them in terms of assessment. So coming back to, we had, I don't know how many people saw the Cali conversation, which prompted this, is thinking about Quality Matters and Online Learning Consortium. How many folks have heard of the Quality Matters and Online Learning Consortium? They are not, well, one is free. Quality Matters is not free, although there's an element of it that's free, and Online Learning Consortium is free. I just want to pause here and go to a resource that I have. So I didn't provide copies of these purposefully, but I wanted to show you. So this is an example as if you're developing. This one's really more for an online environment. But it gives you rubrics, ways for you to think about how you're going to evaluate certain things. This one is for if you're looking at student support for the online environment. And there's a whole series of ways to use this rubric to evaluate. I use Online Learning Consortium and the Quality Matters components to design in addition to assessing. So I use it as a way to think about online learning when I'm doing online learning or face-to-face environments. I think about it for design, and then I use it when I'm working with faculty and then I use it at the end as an assessment tool. So this one's really around student support. There's one for course design review. This is the Online Learning Consortium one that has all these different components of things for you to think about when you're designing. And again, all these are more tailored to the online environment, but a lot of the things in here can clearly be used for the face-to-face environment. Same stuff. So have you all seen these before? Some of you know. This one is really about course design, getting specific. And how I use this one is literally when the course, while I'm designing, I literally walks faculty through this when we're designing a course, either face-to-face or online. And then I actually use this to kind of give them a score at the end. This is even in addition to course evaluations and instructor evaluations. This is an additional piece that I use. Rubric, this one's my favorite. This is the quality, this one you do have to pay for. This is the Quality Matters Rubric Standards. This is on a 3-point structure. And if a faculty member scores on if you are in the 3 columns, so this one is worth 3 points, if they don't get a 3, this is a red flag for the online environment, for example. And this is something they have to definitely change as they move forward. So anything that's 3 points, if they don't get a 3-pointer on that, that's a red flag for Quality Matters. And something they definitely need to work on. Other ones are not, they're important, but they're not as important. Engagement obviously is a huge one in the online environment. But again, these tools are things that I use to design, to think about the end of what I want to occur, and then also to assess. So I kind of use it in 3 different ways. So I don't know if you're thinking about or do that. That's sort of the new piece to backwards design, is using tools that are already at our fingertips. Quality Matters and Online Learning Consortium spent a significant amount of time investigating this. Why recreate the wheel, I say. And all the information is here. And this one is, again, from Quality Matters. This is their new edition. They update things regularly. So this is their new version of that. And what's new about this one is it has a lot with the ADA component at the bottom, or the accessibility component, which is very important to have. So, we're making this available to everybody, aren't we?
Yes.
Good. So you can click on these links and go right there. So when I think about courses, I'm always thinking about how it sort of maps in and aligns with other things. And so I'm thinking about our course learning objectives and pieces within the course, how it maps to the program, and then how it maps to institutional outcomes and also strategic planning components. And this is really like my brain. Sad that this is what my brain is thinking, but this is really what I do think about. I think about really this concept of multimodal when I'm designing courses. Multimodal was mentioned today, not that word perhaps, but multimodal is the concept, as you may all know, about how you really can teach in a variety of different ways using a variety of different sensory methods. Looking at people, looking at how you can target people, the way they're thinking, the way they're hearing, the way they're seeing, the way they're touching things, and figuring out how you can provide them with that information in a variety of different ways. And like I said, one of the slides this morning really gave a nice snapshot of some of the different things you can use for that. But that's what we do as I'm thinking and designing and thinking about things and how that maps into the learning objectives. And so, but I don't start here. Is there a laser on here? I don't start here. I don't start here. I don't start here. I don't start here, and I don't start here. I actually start here when I'm building a course. And I look at the strategic outcomes of the whole entire institution. I map down to look at the particular program. Again, at our school we have JD, Master's, LM certificates, so I'm looking at, we have different outcomes for those, so that's important. Then I create the goals of the course, the larger goals. It's drilled down to the learning objectives for each week, for each topic, for each objective that you want to accomplish. It depends on what your goal is for that course. And the feedback is next, in that order. And then I kind of look at what I want them to do and the different ways I'm going to accomplish that. So my arrows are in the wrong direction. It needs to go this way. Any questions about this concept of alignment, how backwards design is involved, the free sources you can use? I wanted to give you something practical. I can't give you those free sources. Some of them you have to pay for, some are free, but you should definitely check those out. They're excellent. Again, it's the Quality Matters and the Online Learning Consortium. Any questions about that? So Meg is going to talk about how this really, why we're doing this and how it all sort of ties into ABA standards and regulations.
Thank you. So, can I just see a show of hands, people who are familiar with the idea that law schools should have learning outcomes? I'm just asking. I'm glad to see such enthusiasm for this. You may, not know why. Maybe you do. Maybe I hope this isn't going to be too rudimentary then. I'm going to just run us through these ideas. ABA standards. There are ABA standards, which you know, that are related to learning outcomes, competencies, and online education. And then we're going to talk about how those standards relate to the assessment and of the learning in the program being like the JD program or the LLM certificate program or whatever. And then a review of different kinds of assessment, and then a think, pair, share activity, if time permits. So those outcomes, they're supposed to be published on the internet. You may or may not have known that. They must be established and published. Okay, yay. Some examples of where they might be published. Columbia University, right there. That's theirs. Here's Harvard's, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty straightforward. Here's Notre Dame's, just like that. I selected those schools because I could fit their outcomes on one screenshot. There are other schools that have many more layers to their outcomes. You could look at the ones from Albany Law School and you'll see that they have more detail to theirs. And different schools may have chosen different reasons and gone through their analysis about how they do that differently. And there's nobody saying you need to do them one way or the other. Those examples were just because you could see them all a few quickly at a time. So competencies described. 302 is the place where you will find information telling you what needs to be included in a competency. And you can read the slide. This is one rule where there are interpretations to help you understand how to implement the building of competencies in your law school. And the thing I thought was really interesting, I didn't have time to do it, to check all 200 law schools, but I looked for a couple and I didn't find any where the law school may have a particular specialty. So I was thinking, and I don't want to name names because they don't have them, and I don't want to feel like I'm calling schools out, but like, say a school might be really good at environmental law, and so according to US News anyway, and I might go look and see, like, do they have any competencies related specifically to that program or that part of their program? The schools that I looked up for that did, which suggests that maybe schools are not trying to create extra specializations for themselves, although, according to the interpretation, a school could. So 306 is the standard for online education, and it basically says that if you want to count an online education class toward your program, that it needs to be consistent with your competencies and your outcomes, which is pretty sensible. And then standards 314 and 315 relate to the assessment of learning and the program. So it's interesting to me that these guys, they also do have interpretations. The interpretation for 314, which is the one that says that law schools shall use both formative and summative assessments to measure and improve student learning. It does not particularly, like the interpretation says, no particular formative or summative method. What constitutes the formative assessment you want to use, or you can decide, school, what kind of summative assessment you want to use. You just have to do it. And you should, according to the standard, be providing feedback to students. And this slide, I'm hoping, will help you if you are unfamiliar with the distinction of what constitutes formative or summative assessment. Then Feedback to students, you may realize, I hope you realize, feedback is really important to student growth. I have had conversations with a faculty member who uses rubrics and does a great job of working with students, and was complaining that the students didn't seem to improve between their formative assessment and their summative assessment. It was very similar, and I was like, did you give them back the rubrics? And she was like, no. I'm like, well, if you don't tell them how they need to improve and you just give them a score, they're not probably going to find it as easy to improve, which is why that student communication is just so important. That helps students to identify the gaps in their learning, and it's also helpful as a teacher to evaluate the kinds of, which I assume and hope that you all are doing if you are lucky enough to be teaching, that you're able to look and see patterns across your student performance and say, wow, my students really have a problem understanding this aspect of regulations. Maybe I should go back and address that another way. You may remember from the speaker this morning, the keynote, I thought it was really funny because the thing that people so often do when someone doesn't understand, like sometimes we might use different words in vocabulary, which I do actually think is another way of trying to teach something as opposed to like oral, A-U-R-A-L, as compared with a visual presentation. But like the thing I was thinking is like, sometimes people just shout. Like shouting at your class isn't gonna make it any better. You have to find another way. I think that backward planning, I actually have on a board, on the TAC board right in front of my computer. It's like, you have to think about where you want to go before you leave. Like you can't get where you're going if you don't know where you're trying to go. And I think all wants us to do is really benefited by backward planning. And so with that said, there's a few different types of assessment I thought we might be able to discuss. So we have formative and summative, which I think hopefully you read the slide and you have some idea about that already. There's also peer assessment, which it might be if you have groups of students evaluating each other. Self-assessment, if people are evaluating themselves. And there's benefits to students that come from these different kinds of assessment. Cognitive benefits include students being able to measure what they can do themselves, and affective benefits will relate to students' future behavior, like how are you affecting their behavior. And then there's, of course, corrective benefits, like students can then correct what they're doing, sort of course correct. Oh, I need to research statutes in the code, not the code of federal regulations, for example. There are other types of assessment that I didn't include on this list, such as diagnostic assessments or pre-assessments, which people can argue pedagogically, like, well, are those the same thing or are they different, and how do you use those effectively in your teaching? But we don't have a lot of time to talk through all of the different kinds of assessment. As I think we do have time for this. You could talk to your neighbor about some kind of assessment that you have done or do in a class that you teach, if you're lucky enough to teach. And if you don't, and this is like a minute, 2 minutes, and if you don't teach, you can think back to some kind of assessment that you've experienced in a classroom setting. And I'm going to just try to get to the diversity of different kinds of assessment experiences. Everybody's favorite, like, it's okay, you can talk to people next to you. Hi.
I'd like you to come back.
Can't get it back.
I can hail a cab. All right, we're going to come back together. Yeah.
Ding, ding. Yeah. So thank you guys for engaging in that conversation. I didn't realize how much pent-up energy we have still at the end of the day. Like, I guess the snacks have been doing us all well. So are there a couple people who would like to share different kinds of assessment that they have used or experienced and found valuable or invaluable? I'm open to...
I've used the quiz feature in both Blackboard and Canvas over the last 20 years or so. We just switched to Canvas a year or so ago. And I was just saying that I've noted when a factor is, it seems to be a much more effective tool. And I've used them as before-class assessments of essentially whether or not they've done the reading, and I've used them as after-class assessments in terms of how much they've learned in the in-class workshop. In that context, it has not factored into the grade. It doesn't seem to have been as effective. Sadly, they seem to be they're very motivated. They're law schools. Their students are very motivated by anything that affects their grade. So
Yeah.
I would say I love the quiz feature, particularly Canvas. I love the ability to bake in feedback, so they get instant, once they submit the quiz, they get instant model answers.
Yeah. And instant feedback is supposed to be much more effective than feedback later. If you didn't know that, you should know that. The sooner you can give your feedback after someone gives an answer to a question, the better off you are at correcting their mistakes and thinking. Somebody else? Thank you. Yes, please.
For me, it's been more end-of-course assessments. The students are given kind of Scantron form with, different bubbles from poor, very good, good, excellent type things. And with a couple of options to say, why did you think that? Or, do you have anything else to say at the end? I don't know how effective they are. I think it's really just kind of a popularity contest. I think if the teacher is well liked, the assessments are much more generous than if the teacher's a bit tougher, I'll say.
Yeah, that's interesting because you're flipping the assessment of the students assessing the teachers as opposed to the teachers assessing the students. And it's interesting that we're all being evaluated as we go through. So are there other kinds of assessments? Thank you. Are there other kinds of assessments that people want to share about? There's so much conversation. I feel like I should ask one.
They're talking about the dinner. What
Yeah,
they're
maybe.
doing.
Maybe go get their nails done. That's what. Go ahead.
So I work with a librarian in IT, and whenever I collaborate with him to create learning experiences, and I try to get the students involved at the beginning and let them know this is your class, and I want to know what you're interested in, what you want to get out of it, because I want to make it relevant, and I want them to have something to take with them so that what they know goes on beyond the classroom experience. And so just trying to make it something that they appreciate. And they really enjoy being part of the process because they feel like that they're being heard. This is great.
That's great.
Keynote talked briefly about that this morning, about personalizing really that piece.
It's a great way to engage students if you know them and also if you make them feel that their voice is important in the class.
Example of a formative assessment that we are jettisoning because it's not working. Out-of-class exercises with individualized comments that go back to them that they demonstrate don't mean anything to them because they make the same mistakes on the final exam that is graded. And I think it's because they can tell themselves that it didn't really matter that they didn't get it right on the out-of-class exercise because it didn't count.
It's important to think through how valuable something is as a tool. Go ahead.
Would classroom polling count?
Absolutely.
Something like that?
Absolutely. So, yeah, we have now a whole bunch of different ideas of assessment that have been shared, and these are all tools that you can use, and another strategy or tool that you can use is rubrics, and Tia's going to talk to us about rubrics.
Before you do, Tia, I just want to say my 3 favorite questions in assessment. You might want to write this down, my 3 favorite. And I ask this in the online environment, and I ask this in the face-to-face environment, is what hindered your learning? And that could be after a topic, after a module if you're in the online environment. What helped your learning? And how much time did you take to digest this material? 3 favorite questions that I ask. Tons of response from students on the first 2. The second one's all over the place. I don't know People say 2 hours, some people take 7 hours to work on something. But what hindered your learning and what helped your learning might be two valuable questions you might want to ask along the way. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, image credits, sorry.
All right, so we have looked at backwards design, which means that we know at the beginning, as we are planning our lesson, what we want our learning outcome to be. We've looked at the ABA standards as they relate to assessment. Now let's look at rubrics as a tool for assessment. Rubrics are used to assess student work. It usually includes 3 essential features: evaluative criteria, quality definitions for those criteria at particular levels, and a scoring strategy, meaning there's a point value associated with each criteria. In essence, your rubric is an articulation of the skills and learning outcomes that you want the students to have demonstrated by the end of the assignment. So rubrics benefit students. For one, if a student has a rubric at the beginning when the assignment is assigned by the teacher, the student can review that rubric and know what the teacher expects. They also allow students, if they save their rubrics that were used by the teacher over time, to see their progress. So that's another point. Rubrics benefit teachers. Creating a rubric when forming an assignment causes the teacher to think about the assignment more. Often, rubrics are a work in progress. The teacher can use a rubric, evaluate what all the students have done on the assignment, and then perhaps in the next iteration of the assignment, decide, I think I'll change this part of the rubric. It's a work in progress. It saves time in grading. So instead of having to write the same comments over and over again on students' work, you can have comments that are in the rubric already. Oftentimes, if you look at a course at a whole level, and if instructors get together and decide they want to reevaluate a course, they can look at a collection of rubrics that were used in that course and say, we're going to use this to evaluate this course over time. If instructors are all looking at, for example, different skills that they want the students to acquire, and the instructors work on the rubric together, it can help them come to the same conclusions about what level of quality of work that they're looking for students. So, in other words, it can minimize inter-rater variability. You can have standardized rubrics. So I would like to give you 3 points about rubrics. First, make the rubric user-friendly for both the instructor and the student. So let's look at a sample rubric. This is a timeline rubric from readwritethink.org. Readwritethink.org is actually a K-12 website, and I will show you some rubrics from some links to websites for higher education later, but anything can be adapted and used for your purposes. So, in the rubric, we will have the dimensions along the side. There we go. Quality of content, quantity of facts, accuracy of content, sequence of content. And typically, you'll have between 3 and 5. We will also have the categories. Excellent, good, needs improvement. You can also use different labels. Highly proficient, proficient, lacks proficiency. These categories are the estimation of the student performance, what level. What we fill in the blocks explains exactly how that work looks. So for example, if it's an excellent quality of content, included events are important and interesting for our timeline, no major details are excluded. Make sure that the dimensions and categories are easy to understand. So therefore, you will usually use short and descriptive words. One of the biggest proponents of rubrics is W. James Popham. He is an emeritus professor at the University of California, Los Angeles. And he has noted that in rubrics, less is more. So they should be short. If you're using a rubric for a simple or routine assignment in your class, you probably don't want your rubric to be more than 1 or 2 pages. Now, the exception to that rule is, for example, if you have a whole program that you're evaluating, you could possibly end up with a 10-page rubric. But for something that you're going to use to assess a student's work and give back to the student, make sure it's digestible. 1 to 2 pages is good. The second point is tailor your rubric to the assignment. There are 3 main types of rubrics. There are holistic, analytic, and single point rubrics. With a holistic rubric, it's the most general type, and I have an example right here. So it will list the levels of performance and just a general description for that type of performance level. This example is from the Center for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition at the University of Minnesota. So let's go back to our slide. And the analytic rubric is one that we've already seen. It was the sample rubric on one of the previous PowerPoint slides. But it will typically have more detail. So you can have more criteria here. You also have a range for the score. It lists the score. And sometimes in rubrics you will see a place for the instructor to write comments. So basically an analytic rubric breaks the assignment down into last but not least, there is the single point rubric. And the example for this rubric comes from Jennifer Gonzalez's blog. She is a former middle school teacher. She also has taught pre-service teachers. Let's see if I can make that larger. So in the center, you have the criteria, and the criteria basically tell you the standards, just what is proficient. This rubric does not already break down what is below the standard or what is above the standard. That is left blank for the instructor to write in. So this rubric will probably cause the instructor to have to write a little more. So here are some resources for creating rubrics. And if you go to the short URLs, we have 2 of them here. First one will take you to a Dropbox file with a version of today's slides with the links to the resources that we pointed out to you in this session. The second one will take you to a DIGO outline, which has links to many resources and scholarly articles on assessment and on backward design and rubrics as well. I noticed some people were taking photographs of that. That was not my third point. Point number 3, use resources that are readily available. And so those were the ones that were on the slide that I just showed you. Know that you don't have to start from scratch. There are many examples of rubrics that others have made. They come from all levels of education, and you can adapt them for your purposes. So I will now turn it over to Patty for our next activity.
So I'm a big fan of practical stuff. So let me get out of here. And we found for you, we want to do another activity. I know you're thrilled. This activity though, it's not. So super cool is thinking about the stages of backward design. This is an example of a completed version of thinking about the stages. So thinking about the desire, thinking about the evidence, what they need to do, and then thinking about the activities around that. This one is for something I know nothing about, westward expansion and pioneer life. It means nothing to me. Well, it means something to me, I suppose. But it walks you through. So this is sort of the idea of things, describing what the people need to understand, and then questions that might sort of go with that. At the top here is a stage 2, and this, do we have the link for this on that site as well? For them to get access to this?
We might.
I think.
can
If not,
double
we'll add
check
it.
It's a Dropbox file, and I may update it. It's not there, so keep checking back and forth.
Yeah. This is just, I like handy little sheets, right? So it's electronic, you can fill this in, and then it kind of gives you an example then of the evidence that you would need to actually do this particular assignment, and then tasks that need to actually come through, and then really the actual activity itself is listed here. Again, in a neat little package. What we want you to do is try to think of an activity that you can do to do this yourself. So this is the empty one that you will find if you go, once we have that resource available for you. But we want you to do this today if you could, using the concept of creating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is the idea. Something you should all know something about. The beautiful of creating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is there's a variety of different ways you can do it. Bless you. There's also, if you looked it up, I don't know how many of you people know this, but if you really thought it through, there's actually 360-something steps to create a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. For example, if someone doesn't know what peanut butter is, they're not from this area, you have to explain what peanut butter is. Maybe have to explain different kind of knives you might use. They might grab the wrong knife. If I were to teach my 6-year-old how to create a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, there would be a lot of details that I would provide to them, or him, as opposed to if I were to teach you how to create a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So you have to think about your audience, you have to think about all the different pieces. So it's a very general topic, but what I want you to do with at least 3 people is walk through this concept of thinking about the end first. Thinking about what the objectives would be, how you would move forward with thinking about the activities, and what you want the people to do to learn how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So pretend you're teaching me how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I have never made one before. I never made any sandwich before. It's a strange concept, but I've never made any sandwich before. And I also have an allergy to peanuts, which I don't, but pretend I do. So it's a little caveat for you to think about how you're really going to design this. And think about what your objectives would be, what activities you would have moving forward, and how you would assess it. Everyone with me?
Are you only allergic to peanuts?
You can ask me questions. Yes, this is very exciting. I don't know. Yes, I'm only allergic to peanuts.
Have you eaten a sandwich before?
I have never eaten a sandwich before.
Uh-oh.
You have bread in your house.
I do have bread in my house.
You know what bread is?
I do know what bread is.
You have a gluten allergy.
It's for me to eat.
Wait, what is a sandwich though? Anyone who teaches contracts knows that that itself is a
I
question.
do not know what sandwich is. I've never had
That's
one.
been litigated. Is a burrito a sandwich? You can look it up.
Chicken wings, I think, are a sandwich in some place in Texas. I learned that in the last
And there's a
week.
great YouTube video about the different things that can make up a sandwich. Wasn't there an IP suit also?
Any other questions? You asked me if I had a gluten.
Yes, you said only peanuts.
Oh, only peanuts.
I don't know if that was, I just know the one about interpretation of the word sandwich.
The question was strawberry, raspberry, grape. I don't know. What is that? You mean like jam? I like jam over jelly. But I've never had it in a sandwich. I've only had it since with like cream cheese. Listen, I'm making this stuff up. I don't know. Okay, start thinking about how you're designing I would like to make my own sandwich and then eat it. I So you're thinking about backwards design, you're thinking about project
One by one.
Out of the same time. Put them in a bowl, just like mix them together. All of them.
And also,
Okay, everybody have enough time? Let's just start with the first step. And then if we need more time, we can go on, so you can give me more time for the second step. And I really want volunteers. I know it's like 5:15, but talk to us. Tell us. Backwards design is an easy concept. It's very simple. You've probably been doing it yourself all along.
So it might be because we're super tired
Yes.
right now, but as we were discussing, how we would like to, we knew our outcome, but how we were gonna go about it.
Yeah.
I think if you read our instructions, you might end up with 2 loaves of bread smushed together. Because we're like, well, what is a slice? Is her bread in her house already sliced? Is it a little?
Yeah.
And we just kind of went down this rabbit hole of things we don't actually usually think about.
Yeah,
when-
and that's the 360 steps or so where it comes
Yeah.
from, is the concept is first there's all the details of the bread, there's details of the butter, peanut butter or other kinds of butter, there's details of the jelly versus jam and the flavors, and there's the slicing
yeah. Or even
component.
gaining access to the ingredients.
Yes, where do you buy it?
Yeah.
Do you,
Right.
yeah, very good. You see, there's all these different pieces.
We added a constraint that it has to be able to fit in your mouth, so I think that we fixed the loaf thing. Has to be able to fit in your
What
mouth.
if you cut it? Is that part of the direction?
So you're approaching triangles versus rectangles, but we didn't quite get there.
We thought the triangle might be better for conveyance of,
Just buy
hand it off.
Smuckers Uncrustable.
Yeah.
Yeah, we, what?
I agree. I've never had one personally. Are they even good? I don't even know.
They're very sharp.
Young crusters and then frozen.
That was the IP.
Was it? That was an IP case, so see, this is very exciting.
Christine Farley.
We were concerned that our instructions were going to lead to you poisoning yourself and thought we should cancel the entire thing.
This is a good idea.
Very thoughtful.
We had safety concerns about like how allergic you were to peanuts,
Yeah.
whether there should be gloves and gas masks.
Were there peanuts in the facility that made the almond butter, and so is there cross-contamination? that we have to
That's
be-
true, there could be issues there.
I think one of the previous rubrics actually related to a course you had had something about the order of the lessons. So,
Yeah,
I mean, we actually had a little argument about whether to combine the jelly and the peanut butter or put it separately on.
Interesting.
No
Isn't there a product that actually,
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and that was
Squirrel, yeah.
Is that where the-
by the Welch's squirrel thing.
I've never bought that.
I'm not sure that's either peanut butter or jelly, I think that's chemicals.
Yeah.
So give me some objectives.
Verified
We
whether
certainly are using creativity. I love it.
Toxic beer pot.
That's what we wanted. But what could the objectives be? Like, so what is the outcome? Give me one.
Not killing you.
Being able to deconstruct a concept into subparts.
Oh yeah, so very theoretical of you. Being able to deconstruct. She's such a teacher, right there. Yeah, that's an excellent one. You had a more practical one.
Not killing you.
Not to
Yeah.
kill me. Excellent. What about like an enjoyment? You guys are
Yeah, an edible thing.
Yeah, can I like enjoy the sandwich, or is there?
That was not part of the,
We're using Nutella, so that might help.
Oh, Nutella. That's delicious. It does make everything better. Okay, so we would come up, you're getting the idea, we're using fun here, which is good, fun, learning and fun, it's very good. We're getting that concept, what are things that we can actually do? What are we trying to accomplish? Okay, and so with a second, stage 2, did you guys get to stage 2, then to think even further? Do you want to take we have plenty of time. You want to take like 2 minutes just to brainstorm number 2. So now, how would you know that I actually was successful here? How would you assess that I was successful in creating the sandwich, or eating the sandwich, or not dying? Or how are you? The not dying one is pretty. If I'm breathing, I'm still.
I would want to eat the sandwich.
You would want to eat the sandwich. Let's say that is the objective. So that the objective is to actually eat the sandwich. So you would actually see me eat the sandwich. Would that be how you would assess?
You would see me eat the sandwich.
You would steal the sandwich from me.
You have to make sure it's safe.
It's part of the grading. It's a grading requirement.
There you go.
And I have to not die.
I like that. My guinea pig.
So at least 95% of the stuff inside the sandwich needs to get to your mouth that they can't.
So you're putting some numbers on it, which of course I like, making actual numbers. 95% of the content in the sandwich has to actually be digested or eaten in some way.
Not smashed out the sides.
Yeah, not,
Yeah.
falls from holding, like what?
Be able to distinguish between peanut butter and jelly sandwich and say like Thai peanut soup.
Yeah.
Just
Or a
because
ham
they're peanuts.
sandwich.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Or whatever.
What,
Yeah.
what
So
makes something a sandwich?
maybe categorize or identify. Let's use our Bloom's taxonomy action verbs. When I think about all those different things, how can we, I need to identify maybe the ingredients of peanut butter, the practical ingredients, or the basic concepts of a sandwich. There's probably just several different things that I could build into that. Okay, and what are some of the activities? How would you teach me all of this?
You have to demonstrate
Step 3.
some of the verbs, spread.
There was a great example over in this group. I seem to recall somebody talking about YouTube videos.
Yeah, we initially thought a YouTube video of a dog eating a sandwich would be highly instructional. But if you have YouTube video of someone making a sandwich.
Yeah.
Dog making a sandwich.
Well, dog making a sandwich if you believe in fantasy.
You haven't met my dog.
So the general concept being that audio and video would be an important
An
way to showing
instructional tool,
it.
or
Instructional.
even have you make a video of your second sandwich.
Love it, which I do
prove
with my
that you could
students
do
all the
it.
time. They need to actually produce videos of things they're learning and present. Teaching is an important way to learn, so maybe I have to teach you that I know how to make peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Love that.
Okay. I'm into making and doing things like they would take a period of time, so a time lapse of you start to finish making the sandwich, so you can see all the process that had happened without watching hours and hours of video, and then you can say while you're doing it, what made you make this decision, and how did that work out, and then when you had an obstacle, what did you do?
Yeah. Like in PowerPoint, would that be a PowerPoint thing?
A time lapse would be a video.
A video, time lapse. Here it is.
Yeah.
I frown for PowerPoint, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So you can a minute. And you
I
can
like
see
it.
kind of the steps that
Yeah,
took place
excellent.
and the learning that happened.
And the learning that happened over time.
I was thinking a field trip to the supermarket to see different types of ingredients, different types of breads, different types of jellies.
Yeah. What if I don't like that version of peanut butter and jelly? What happens? You know, just like when you're teaching a particular item, a particular topic, and it expands on to another idea, and it's a teaching moment. Is that part of an assessment? Is that part of the outcome that you might want to accomplish? So maybe I learned how to make this peanut butter and jelly, and I learned how to maybe eat it and enjoy it. I didn't die. But maybe there's some like gourmet peanut butter and jelly thing that I want to strive to make or do. And how do I get there? Kind of like the keynote today, I always do this too, you end your presentation with where do you go next, right? That could be a big part of your teaching, a big part of backwards design. Where are you going to go next? I think is a big part.
They can make a ham sandwich with lunch in it.
Oh, sandwiches. The beauty of sandwiches is never ending. I don't even like sandwiches. They're so funny. I'm trying to be carb free, which is why.
You can do that with a sandwich. No one said use low carb bread.
That is true. I do use low carb. I like wraps now. It's my new thing. So I actually make a peanut butter and jelly wrap.
You could also make, who said that a sandwich has to be between two pieces of bread?
Absolutely correct. Some people do say that they do. Some people say that it doesn't.
It could be between two slices of cucumber.
That's right.
You
Open
never
up
had
peanut butter and jelly and cucumbers. Yes, I've heard of, yes, people do that. Yep, absolutely.
Did you also change quizzes?
Say it again.
Ask would change the peanut butter and jelly.
I don't know. He asked me what the fast food restaurant or chain that had a peanut butter and jelly milkshake. I don't have the answer to that. That's certainly deconstructed. If you watch Food Network, you know, they have a deconstruction show. Like the knowledge we have about food these days is incredible. Anyway, simple task, but complex enough where you can see the complexity that this could possibly have, especially for someone who's new to the topic, which most of your students are. All your students coming in that you're teaching, they are new. And it's actually how I approach instructional design when I'm teaching. So when I'm teaching faculty how to design face-to-face courses and online courses, I don't know. I am not a lawyer. I don't know anything about the law. And it's a great thing because I am the ultimate student for them. So they design their course and I rip it apart because I don't know what the terminology is. I don't know what bread is. It's the same concept. I don't know all those things. So I'm breaking it down, and I break it down by outcomes. I break it down by what they want me to learn and how they want me to learn it, and then does that activity make sense? And can you assess it is the big thing. Have to assess it.
And where do we go from here? I think, isn't there a reception?
There is a reception, yeah.
If they only have.
Yeah. Any questions, actually?
Stop.
I have no idea where the reception is, but enjoy that. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Well, I give it to them, they rest for themselves. So while they're designed before they get to I provide them. I just see you Your perfect.
both of them. And I'm sure I'm the same way, but I'm sure it's the same way. Yeah, and I've been interested.
That's about the spread they have.
That would be like,
Yes.
Oh, no, you're talking about the thing with the.
I have not had.
Comparison, multiple.
Oh, yeah.
Back real quick and then.
I did it wrong.
That's the, one of those things that they the melody is up, the melody. So every once in a while, I just
I had a gloss about that. Yeah, the fact that I am. I'm not. I'm glad I had time to take it out of commission because it was so right. That's yeah, but there were two now for a fact. They made the drive 3 times. Too long. All right, you can go home to your children.
That's for now.
Yeah, that's, I was
Yeah, you would.
We're scared to get it on there.
Is this your first time? I had a friend party plan this morning. I will try and stand what I run into.
It's a crazy thing.
No one can tell me.
Cool. All right.
You're at your state.
I'm not.
Yeah, so Monday was back here on a
University of Tulsa.
Anyway, I still had guy here long.
How many administrative firms?
You have to think about it. Yeah, you can see someone like this. Yeah.
But you didn't tell me there were.
I've never
Administrative breaks, I had to find out where to find them.
The challenge is always having those.
And I never.
Not necessarily, you didn't find any of the ones.
Yeah, that's what I'm like.
Yeah, but if they had been on the rubric, they would have known to look.
They're doing all this on way.
But they were supposed to, it's not in order. But should have elected.
Well, they were supposed to look from the relevant law.
Deb, do you know how
We
we
didn't
did
tell them
that?
they needed to be
How
administrative.
do I get to the hotel?
They needed to find the relevant law, and the relevant law
They didn't
was.
even consider the other. With your luck.
But that's one of those, but that's one of the, that's one of the problems with the overuse of rubrics is the students have learned.
Never mind, I gotta run.
Oh, you got it?
They don't have to get rubrics, they get checklists.
Normally I walk, oh, not that far.
Yeah.
What?
That's they go to.
I don't think that far, but I.
Checklists, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So it's one of those things,
My brother out, Michelle's good
they
out.
haven't learned to say, well, if I have to find the relevant.
Oh my gosh, Michelle, oh, I'm sorry, you haven't met in person.
No, but that didn't come.
No, you're just.